Hey, yo, I gotta bake another one. Listen, it really doesn't matter, but I'm just doing this video because I can. Because some of y'all are leaving stupid comments on my previous video talking about Jaron Boots Ennis and Brian Norman. So let's go over this again. Now, the latest I'm seeing from people is this notion that Brian Norman was allegedly, and this is not my facts, but allegedly he was paid $200K for his last fight. So this has now become, I guess, a popular talking point. Like, hey, why don't you take the Jaron Boots Ennis fight for the amount that we say you should take it for, which in the ballpark neighborhood of 1.5, 1.7 million, because it's more than you got in your last fight, right? And you guys think this is somehow clever. So I want to talk about that. So let's get it. Okay. So I put this, it says, I'm going to read it and then I'll break it down. Unpopular opinion. Why do people keep quoting how much Brian Norman Jr. made in his last fight? LOL, stupid. His last fight, he was fighting for a vacant belt and he wasn't a champion. He was not a champion. Today, he is a full champion and actually had a great performance over a ranked Santillian to become champion. So we just dismiss what's changed and omit this new data. For example, in 2022, Ryan Garcia fought Javier Fortuna. His very next fight in 2023 was Gervonta Davis. So does anyone think that Ryan Garcia, his paycheck, was similar when he fought Fortuna as it was for Tank? So I don't understand why you guys think this is a clever argument. People are saying like, oh, how could Brian Norman ask for more? He only got $200K in his last fight. I just gave you an example, and I'll give you another one. But Ryan Garcia, his fight right before Tank Davis was against Javier Fortuna. I know for a fact there's no way they made remotely the same, those two fights. Ryan told you he made like 30 to 50, 60 million fighting Tank Davis. So he went from whatever much smaller purse that he made with Fortuna all the way up to a Tank fight, and it was a pay-per-view. So that's how boxing works. It's based on a multitude of things. Pay like you weigh, your market value, what have you done for me lately? People keep referencing Brian Norman's last rate of pay as if things don't change. There's nothing new. There's no new data. There's no new like things that you need to input. I don't get this logic. It's really sounding foolish. But let me give you guys another example. I said, so why keep referencing Brian Norman's last rate of pay? Also, Andy Ruiz Jr. had his first fight with PBC, right? It was on Danny Garcia. And this off the top of the head. I want to say it was Danny Garcia versus Granados undercard. But it was definitely a Danny Garcia at the StubHub. I remember it. That was Andy Ruiz's first fight with PBC after becoming a free agent, leaving Top Rank, right? He was on Danny Garcia Granados undercard, and he fought for about $300K, right? His very next fight, he was making $7 million to fill in for Jarrell Big Baby Miller, who popped dirty. And in order to save the show and fight and face Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz was who they called. So Eddie Hearn and DAZN, they know very well about overpaying a fighter to get the fighter comfortable and, get things squared away to the part where you can make the fight, let it materialize, and get a bigger fight that people are going to be more thrilled with. Jarrell Big Baby Miller, that fight obviously couldn't happen because of the positive PED test. So they brought in Andy Ruiz. So it's funny to see and hear Eddie Hearn And you guys keep talking about Brian Norman. He only made 200,000. Okay, well, you see it on the screen. Andy Ruiz hit the jackpot with his fight against Anthony Joshua. Before their first bout in June 2019, Andy Ruiz was pulling in about 300,000 in total career earnings. So he might have been making, it says total, so he might have been making less than that. But get this, after he pulled off the shocking win against Joshua, his purse skyrocketed to $7 million, including fight earnings and bonuses. So we're talking about a guy in Andy Ruiz who his purses weren't enormous, but then he had the momentum and he upset Joshua, and then they had to pay like they weigh, right? So in boxing, things change. Now, I wouldn't say that Brian Norman had a moment quite as supreme as upsetting a heavyweight champion. However, his fight with Santillan is, I want to say this. I want to say it's pretty equivalent to what I believe is Jaron Boots Ennis' best win, which is Roman Villa. Let me know in the comment section, what is Jaron Boots Ennis' best win? Because I want to say Brian Norman's best win is against Santillan. Santillan can fight. He was undefeated. They both were risking their undefeated record. Santillan also beat Alexis Rocha, who was a top Golden Boy guy, and he ended up stopping him. So this was a very good win for Brian Norman. But it's mind-boggling to see that people keep talking about, oh, but he only made this and that. Things change. At the time, look, they fought for this belt, and then after Norman won the WBO belt, the interim belt, by stopping Santillan, he got elevated because Crawford moved up. So I see a lot of strawman arguments as far as this Brian Norman. Again, it really doesn't matter because the fight's not happening. The fight is dead. It's dead, so it's not happening. And I told you this was coming. You guys didn't want to believe me. And now it's what we usually get from Eddie Hearn and DAZN. Finger pointing, blame game. Android 2.0. We can't deliver when DAZN had and Eddie Hearn had Demetrius Boo Boo Andrade. We, meaning DAZN and Eddie Hearn in Rematch Room, can't deliver him the big fights. So it becomes a blame game. Oh, but Charlo. Oh, but PBC. We sent him an offer. And now enter Boots. He's in the same exact position. So sad. Same position as Demetrius Andrade. You're getting overpaid for fights that nobody wants to see. So that's how they lure you in. And here's the problem. You're already getting overpaid. So that's already one person getting overpaid. They don't want to have to overpay your opponent as well. And as far as I'm concerned, first of all, Jaron Ennis and Brian Norman, it's really not a colossal fight. It's a good fight for hardcore fans. Obviously, it's one of the best fights for Jaron Ennis that could have been realistic. I get that. But it's not no Mayweather versus Cotto level fight where it's like this huge ordeal. It's just it's a good fight. And that's the problem. Boots is talented. He got with someone who doesn't seemingly have a great relationship with Bob Arum, doesn't seemingly have a great relationship with PBC. And now it just got a whole lot worse because Stanionis just got elevated. Barrios got elevated. So that means PBC has two of the belts, two of the full belts at welterweight. And then now you have Brian Norman. You can't get any of these fights done. So as I keep saying, enjoy Boots versus Karen Chukadazian, Daisy Dukian, or whatever his name is, like I predicted. And you guys are falling for the mousetrap. Let's just point the finger and say this guy's ducking. Meanwhile, the end result remains the same. Boots teamed up with Eddie Hearn, and his first 2 fights are likely David Avocado, and then his second fight will likely be his mandatory. And if Eddie Hearn knew that the purse bid, they were on a time crunch. They had, I think, till the 28th or 30th of August to get the Brian Norman fight done. Brian Norman said there was 3 days where they didn't hear back from someone. So it got stalled out just long enough. And now doing a bunch of interviews. See, and that's the difference. And you guys are falling for it. Eddie Hearn, he does interviews. So Eddie Hearn will create his angle and do his damage control. Whereas if a fight fell apart, like let's say when Jermall Charlo and Jaime Munguia were in talks to fight and then it fizzled out and fell apart. The difference with PBC is this. PBC is not going to send somebody out. Al Heyman's not going to do it. They're not going to send out their promoters to do a bunch of damage control to try to make Jermall Charlo look like Golden Boy and Munguia didn't want the fight. The reality is they tried to make the fight and it didn't happen. So they just move on and they work on the next order of business. Versus a guy like Eddie Hearn, mans like Eddie Hearn, it becomes his job, since he's delivering a fight for Boots that is not a big fight. It's not a fight that anyone wants to see. He already beat the guy. And because he has to deliver this fight, and it's almost like you got to deliver the grim news and the bad news to fans. So now you need a target, you need a mark, you need a scapegoat. And this time it's Barrios and Stanionis and PBC and also Brian Norman. You know, we can't get big fights for Boots, so we'll just blame them other guys. But the reality is it looks suspect because there's fights within DAZN. Let's say, forget Top Rank, forget PBC, forget Unification. There's still better fights for Boots, whether he has to take a risk and move up or try to fight at a catchweight. You got some good options for him with DAZN or even within Rematch Room, like Boots versus Madrimov. That would be an excellent fight. Boots versus Crawford. That would be an excellent fight. Boots versus Virgil Ortiz, who works with Golden Boy, who works with DAZN. But they're not making any of these fights, right? So I said what I said, and I believe what I said. This just comes down to like, hey, you're ducking and finger pointing. Nobody really cares. Make the good fights. People will buy them. Boots versus Karen is terrible.